The world is gathered in Dubai this weekend for the COP28 climate conference, a global effort to fight the growing impact of climate change. Catherine Abreu is the founder and executive director of Destination Zero and one of Canada's net zero advisors. She joins us now from Dubai to discuss how this year's event is going. Good to have you, Catherine.
Thanks for having me, Jaden.
Billions of dollars have been pledged in the past couple days to fight this global crisis. In your opinion, which initiative stands out the most and has the greatest chance to be successful?
So one of the greatest developments that we've seen so far at COP28 is the very early adoption of what's being called the Loss and Damage or the Climate Impacts Fund. This is something that countries hardest hit by the climate crisis have been fighting for decades, a pot of money that they can use to support them in compensating for the irreversible losses and damages that they're already experiencing because of climate change. And the adoption of this fund happened on the first day of COP. I've never seen this kind of decision being made so early on in a set of UN climate talks. And so that's really significant. And a lot of the money that you mentioned that's been pledged so far over the last few days is going into that fund. I think all of us can relate to the escalating climate impacts that we're all experiencing in communities around the world every year. And so it is really positive to be seeing a new fund established to be helping countries deal with those impacts.
Yeah, and Canada has been very active since the conference began. King Charles even mentioned our country by name on Friday. Do you think our country is doing enough to eliminate carbon emissions?
So it's definitely the case that on the major issue of loss and damage that we've been dealing with in the early part here of COP28, Canada has come up to the plate better than it has in the past. This is an issue that Canada has not had a very constructive history on, but in the last few years, I think Canada has really again, stepped up to the plate and been doing a lot better on the issue of loss and damage, and also has been showing up better in conversations about how we help to finance those countries who need support in adapting to the impacts of climate change and mitigating carbon emissions. Whether Canada is doing enough when it comes to mitigating our own carbon emissions is a really good question. We've got a solid set of policies now in our emissions reduction plan to draw down those emissions, but we keep hearing reports, most recently from the Commissioner for Environment and Sustainable Development, that we're still not on track to meet our climate goals. And a big reason for that is because of the ongoing and growing emissions from our oil and gas sector. And in fact, dealing with the emissions from fossil fuel production and combustion is a huge part of the conversation that we'll be having here in Dubai for the next couple of weeks.
And a tough conversation there. Catherine, many promises are often made at these meetings, whether financial or target deadlines. Many often fall short. Do you think the agreements reached so far can realistically be met?
They can't be met unless we get the energy transition on track within this decade. Every scientific body, the International Energy Agency, has told us this year that a main reason that we are off track to deliver on these commitments is because we're continuing to produce fossil fuels and continuing to rely on fossil fuels for our energy, even when renewable energy is some of the cheapest energy out there at this point. And so a big part of what we will be hoping for here at COP28 is a global agreement to accelerate the phase out of fossil fuel production and use and the phase in of renewable energy and energy efficiency. We have to clean up that energy supply if we're going to have any hope of delivering on the promises of the Paris Agreement. And that is just as true in Canada as it is in the rest of the world. And so we have to develop our own policies in Canada to deal with the emissions and the ongoing production of fossil fuels. And so I think that's why we're having a very live conversation about the emissions cap policy at home.
Before we let you go, Catherine, why is it so important that we keep having these conversations moving forward?
Well, climate change is only getting worse. 2023 is the hottest year on record. And after 30 years of climate negotiations, emissions are higher than ever. And so it's clearly imperative that we continue bringing every country in the world together to figure out how we improve our action on climate change. And I am encouraged by the fact that we're finally seeing fossil fuels being spoken about so explicitly in these talks after decades of them being ignored in the UN Climate Convention. And so hopefully we can correct the missing gaps that we've had in our climate agreements so far, and that will send the signal to governments and to investment markets to do a whole lot better.
Catherine Abreu, founder and executive director of Destination Zero, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks again.